This is Awareness Explorers.
Welcome back, fellow explorers, to Awareness Explorers. I'm your co-host, Jonathan Robinson, and with my friend and co-host,
Brian Tom O'Connor.
And as is often the case, we have a fascinating guest, somebody that I know a little bit, and I know that you're going to enjoy hearing about his story and his process. His name is Luciano Melo. He's a PhD researcher on awakening and shares his own story for going from depression and overthinking into a non-dual awakening. Luciano journeyed also through the late locations beyond the Martin Matrix, if you know about that, and he has developed his own map of awakening stages. He's currently a visiting scholar at Penn State University in contemplative studies and doing research on the complete process of spiritual awakening across contemplative traditions. Welcome to Awareness Explorers, Luciano.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Brian. Thank you for the invitation. I'm really glad to be here.
So I know a little bit about your story, but most of our listeners won't. I know that you had a challenging life and then things changed. Tell us about what that process was like.
Yeah, I think I had more or less a normal kind of life, let's say. I never felt really that I fit in society, in life in general. I had depression. But I think that the worst, it was the sense of really not fitting in, not really finding a place where I felt comfortable, not feeling comfortable in my own skin. I think I've always been also an overachiever, and it was difficult because of the depression and being overachiever at the same time. So it was like paradoxical in a way.
Mm-hmm.
But I've always been involved in some kind of spirituality. In the beginning was much more dual. So it was work with energies, out of the body experiences, trying to research consciousness and its manifestations, let's say. That was my perspective, at least. So I've always been involved in some kind of spirituality since I was very young. But only much later, in 2020, that I started really more getting involved with the idea of non-duality or the idea of a spiritual awakening. I had no idea about spiritual awakening whatsoever in the beginning. I mean, in the beginning, no, for most of my life, actually.
Uh-huh. Did you take the Finder's course around then, or what propelled you forward?
Yeah, I think what happened in 2022, I had an experience that I think it was much more related to non-duality.
Mm-hmm.
So at the time I had a classic out-of-the-body experience. I was out of my body. And then suddenly what happened is that I started against my will to go up. It was like some energy was in my body. I didn't ask for it. I didn't do anything. And then suddenly I was going up in like high speed. And it got to a point in which the astral body, that it was just like this body, started to dematerialize, let's say. And from that, like a ball of light came to be. And from that ball of light, it was like the entire universe was getting out of it. And suddenly I was the entire universe. I felt that I was the galaxies, the universe itself, like the physical universe itself. I was everything. And then suddenly from that moment, there was a moment of nothingness. I don't remember if I was aware of the nothingness or I was aware of the nothingness after I came back from that state. But I remember a moment in which there was nothing. There was no me, there was no universe, there was no space, there was no time. And then I came back to that ball of light, And then I remember getting inside of the astral body again, and then seeing my body laying down in bed. I was laying on my stomach, and then I touched the body, and I remember I jumped from the bed because there was a lot of energy. And the things that I remember is that everything was kind of golden, like a gold dust in the air.
Mm.
I would look at trees and they were all luminescent in a way. I didn't know what had happened. My paradigm at the time, it was related much more to the idea of cosmic consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
I remember I used to read about a lot about the body experiences, and there were some experiences that people related that they called cosmic consciousness. That
Now, all
was
this
the
happened.
idea of becoming the universe or becoming everything.
This all happened spontaneously without any.
Well, I used to do a lot of energy work, a lot of techniques to get out of the body, but never related to the idea of non-duality. I had no idea whatsoever. I had never read anything related to Asian traditions or old traditions. My paradigm was much more like kind of scientific in a way. It was much more like, oh yeah, try this technique and get out of the body by yourself, and then you will see that you have more than one body, that there are multiple dimensions. It was much more practical in a way.
Mm-hmm.
But at that point, I thought, okay, I cannot explain what happened, especially after the cosmic consciousness, when I was everything, when there was nothing. I could not explain. Because at the time, my paradigm was there are only two things in the universe: consciousness and energy. And consciousness is what manipulates energy, let's say. It's what expresses energy or manifests energy. So it was very dualistic. But at that point, everything was one and then nothing. So I really couldn't explain. And there was nobody who could say anything to me at that point. But I remember that if I looked at something, I would become that something. I remember that I had to travel by bus, and I was looking at the woods, and then I became the woods. But it would happen like fast, and I would get out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And everything looked like an illusion to me. Like the world became kind of transparent, and it was like, this is really exist, or this is just Maya illusion, right?
Yeah.
I remember that I knew that word Maya that the Hinduism uses, right, to describe reality, that it's not real.
Are you
But
freaking out during this time, or are you just like enjoying it?
no, it was very enjoyable.
Okay.
It was extremely enjoyable. It was at the I was part of this group, and in the group, like having a cosmic consciousness was something that everybody aspired, I think.
Yeah.
I never thought about it. I never thought that I would have one, but it was like, imagine that it was like a high point in
Mm-hmm.
terms of having an out of the body experience and then becoming the entire universe, right? So it was very enjoyable in the beginning. I remember that I was not my neurotic self anymore
Mm.
for a while. Uh, but I also remember that a lot of things, I lost interest in a lot of things. For example, watching TV, because I started feeling that everything was an illusion. And then, for example, a movie was an illusion inside of another illusion.
Uh-huh.
So it was like a double illusion. So, but that lasted, I think, I don't know, for a month or so, and then little by little, uh, the old self, let's say, started to come back.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember that I thought, oh, I will have to have another cosmic consciousness in order to experience that. But I started saying at that point, oh, consciousness is beyond space and time. So consciousness, at that point, my paradigm was that consciousness evolves, that I was a consciousness evolving in space and time. And from that moment on, I thought, well, fundamentally, there's no space and time. So number one, consciousness cannot evolve, because if there is no time, how can evolve? Number two, how can exist more than one consciousness? Because if there was no space, either consciousness is everywhere or nowhere. So those were my conclusions. That was very different from the group, let's say. And I started talking to the group that those were my conclusions. Everybody thought, oh, this guy is completely nuts.
And
But
after all of this, did you start to talk to other more non-duality related teachers? For instance, I heard in an interview, though, that you might have gone to an Angelo DeLullo retreat, or is that?
Oh, imagine that this was 2002. I was still living in Brazil. I was still involved in a spiritual group that was very much dualistic. So nobody has ever said, Luciano, maybe this is related to awakening or spiritual awakening or whatever, yoga. I remember that I found books by Ramana Maharshi at that point, but everything that Ramana would say, I read through the lenses of that paradigm.
Yeah.
So I read through the lenses of cosmic consciousness. I couldn't understand any other way. But then I remember that there was a friend of mine who was also part of the group, who was Michael Lydon, that a lot of people know from the POK community. He's a psychologist. And he was pretty much interested as well in cosmic consciousness. He was much more open than I was. He lived in the US, so he's American. So he started having much more contact with non-dual spiritual teachers, including Bernadette Roberts, that I remember that he went to one of her retreats when she was still alive, and other teachers, and he started telling me about those things, because we decided that we would study cosmic consciousness, and those things were related, let's say. But I couldn't tell apart. I couldn't see the differences, let's say. But so I moved to the US in 2009. I started a master's, then a PhD, and only in 2020, it was when I finished my PhD, and then I decided that I would invest time in cosmic consciousness or whatever that was. And then it was when I remembered that Michael had told me about Jeffrey and the Finders.
The Finders
I already had contact before. I remember that in 2000, I think in 17, I tried to do the Finders course, but I was doing my doctoral research in Russia and Venezuela. It was really difficult. I stopped doing. And then in 2020, by the end of 2020, I remembered that there was the Finders, and then I started looking on the internet for information. And then there was only the 45 days. There was no Finders anymore. So it was when I did the 45 days in January 2021. But I still didn't understand that it was related to awakening. For me, it was a way of getting out of depression. I started thinking, okay, what will work for me? So meditation will work. So there is this protocol. This guy seems to be scientific enough for me. He was not like a spiritual teacher. At the time, I was kind of careful about this. I wanted to be very scientific. I wanted to be tested. I wanted to be, like a protocol. So that was very attractive to me. And then I started doing the Finders. Yeah, the Finders, no, the 45 days.
And
45 days, meaning the 45 Days to Awakening course that's part of the Finders course community.
Yeah, so if there was the Finder's course, that it was like a 4 months, I think, course in which you would try many different kind of techniques. And then what Jeffrey did was a much shorter course, that it was 45 days, according to him, with the main techniques that help people to transition from one location to another. So he has still, I think, Martin Matrix, right? With
Yeah,
location.
just to define a couple of the terms for the people who don't know, in the 45-day course, you do these different techniques each week, and the goal is to, if there's a goal, to reach higher locations, which might be defined as different states of consciousness with very specific parameters to each state
Right.
of consciousness. And so you did that, and what were the results of that?
I remember that in the beginning, right away, I was already able to feel like the field of awareness
Mm-hmm.
right in the beginning. So I think in the beginning was really, I transitioned to location one, which was basically to have access to this background, let's say, that is
Mm-hmm.
peaceful, that is still, that is silent. Um, but it was when it was by the end of the 45 days, I remember there was a technique called
The headless way, yeah.
headless way. And then I was already doing GAEs, which is group awareness exercise
Mm-hmm.
online. And I remember that I did the technique and then I went immediately to a GAE. And during the GAE, there was like a shift. It seemed like awareness became aware of itself, let's say, or I became awareness. I
Mm-hmm.
became this witness. I remember that there was a feeling of detachment, but very positive feeling. It was very simple. I remember that I felt that it was very simple. I remember that the colors were very bright and beautiful. I remember that there was a sense of openness, vastness. And then the GAE ended. I went to eat. The food was very interesting to me, even though it was rice, beans, and something very common. The food, the texture, it was completely different. I was very happy. Uh, yeah, the colors, uh, the light was completely different. And I thought, okay, this is the awakening. This is the awakening. This is the day that the awakening happened. But it lasted only 2 or 3 days. I
Mm-hmm.
remember that I went to bed. The next morning was softer a little bit. And then the next morning was completely gone. So I was at that moment, I was completely obsessed over awakening. I already wanted an awakening. I was looking for an awakening. I was doing everything I could to have an awakening because I thought that awakening would resolve all my problems. Uh, and in the beginning, it did, actually. It really did.
Yeah, it's kind of a switch, a bait and switch. It solves all your problems at first, and then you get different problems.
Yes, yes, I think that's it. So what happened is that I talked to Jeffrey. He gave me other techniques that were not part of the 45 days. I started doing them. And then I continued doing GAEs every single day. And I
Is there
went
anything you
to,
can say? Is there anything you can say about the additional stuff Jeffrey gave you? Like what kind of
yeah, it
instruction?
were techniques that was part of the another 45 days, that it was part of the Finder's course, but it was
Uh-huh.
not part of the 45 days. So it was ascension meditation and
Uh-huh.
noticing, which is basically start noting all the sensations and going from one to another and naming them,
Mm-hmm.
be out loud, or it could be even thinking, right? I'm feeling, I don't know, the texture of the shirt on my body, or the air, or the pressure of my leg on the chair.
So it's kind of like a Buddhist noting
Yeah,
method.
yeah,
Uh-huh.
yeah. He gave me those two, and I continued going to the GAs every day. and I would go for walks. Walking meditation was my main one. I started realizing, number one, that I needed to exercise. And number two, that every time I would go for a walk, I was able to connect to this field of awareness and stop labeling everything. I was pretty much invested in the idea that I had to bypass my mind.
Yeah. When you were doing your walking, was there a particular technique you were using? Were you noting? Were you just
No, I
walking?
created this technique. I connected to awareness, and then I tried to stop labeling things that I would see or anything. For example, if I saw a tree, I would try not to say in my mind that it was a tree, that if I liked the tree, if it was green, if it was not green, if it was big or small. And I noticed that the more I did that, the more non-dual experiences I started to have.
Uh-huh.
So
yeah, Brian has a technique in his awareness games book called wordlessness, which is try to be in the world without words, like you were when you were first born. And yeah, that's a really interesting technique. It's immediate, and it definitely can shift your consciousness.
yeah, because at the time I thought, okay, I'm a very conceptual person. I'm a scholar. I pretty much live in my mind. I think a lot. I have to think a lot. So at the time, I thought my mind is the kind of the enemy, and I need to find ways of bypass the mind.
Mm-hmm.
So I avoided, for example, inquiry, that I thought it was basically questions that my mind would want to answer. So I tried inquiry in the beginning, and it always my mind trying to find answers and find answers. So I decided, okay, I'm gonna get away from the mind. And one of the techniques was that one. I started having more and more experiences that I would consider non-dual at the time, like feeling that I'm not an agent in the world, feeling that everything is happening by itself.
Mm-hmm.
So more and more I started having those experiences. So they would last sometimes 1 hour, 2 hours, and then would go away. And I consider that uh, the pre-awakening, that an awakening would happen soon, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
What happened is that I transitioned. I think I started the 45 days in January. In May, I transitioned to location 4, what was called location 4 by Jeffrey Martin, which is a state in which there are no emotions, there is no sense of agency, everything is kind of happening. But the main characteristics, I think, that people even were scared of at the time, it was the no emotions. And with me, it was pretty much that.
And there's no emotions, but it feels incredibly peaceful.
So not for me, it felt flat.
Flat.
It felt like, yeah, that there's no emotions whatsoever, happiness or sadness or peacefulness. No, it felt like, but since I was coming from depression, right? For me, it was amazing.
Right.
At the same time, I remember that I didn't want to talk to anybody. I didn't want to interact. I was not interested in doing anything.
Uh-huh.
I knew about location 4, so it was not that I freaked out and thought it was weird. I remember that in the beginning, it felt completely different than the normal self, let's say. But I knew what it was.
Mm-hmm.
I knew what it was. So I was okay with it. I was not feeling that it was weird or difficult. I thought it was great.
Mm-hmm.
But it lasted like 4 months, I think. 4 months. And then emotions started to really come back in a very wild way. So
yeah, that was what I was going to ask. What happened after? Did it all come back? Did the life of the human being?
yeah, after that, it was much worse because I would wake up angry or feeling fear that I never felt before during the 45 days or doing any technique. I never felt fear. And then suddenly there was a lot of fear. And then I would wake up feeling sad. So I would go to the GAEs, and the technique that I used in the GAEs was very weird. Instead of describing awareness, which is the technique for the GAE, I would say what was here. So sometimes it was anger. I would say there is anger, and I would let anger be. And I noticed that every time I started doing that, I would go deeper into awareness. I would find awareness through that emotion. So I started doing more and more and more of that, let's say, until another shift happened.
Well, let me just interject there, because I was at a retreat with you a couple months ago. When I had shingles. I was in a lot of physical pain.
Right.
And you guided me on a meditation like that. You said, rather than avoid the pain, or I was also angry with it,
Of course.
Go into it and really open to it. And it was kind of like being in a portal where, I experienced a low level, what I would call rage or self-pity or whatever I was experiencing then. And then it would open into this peaceful awareness. And that was a good lesson for me, that is a doorway if you can really be with something and not resist it.
Yeah, so I learned that during that period, because it was completely out of my control. Number one, I would wake up with feeling something. It was not necessarily even related to what was happening in my life. Then during the GAs, I started noticing that they were gateways, right? That if I allowed those emotions to express themselves, little by little, I would get into them, or I would find this fundamental, quote unquote, fundamental reality that people talk about. And suddenly it would be peaceful, or it would be open, or it would be something else.
Yeah.
So I started more and more doing that. But in that period, there was a lot of fear. There was a lot of fear. And then I went to the Angelo retreat when really like an eagle death kind of happened. But yeah, that technique, I think I even use nowadays, because is a technique related to surrender. Of you fighting against the feeling or the emotion or whatever is present, you allow that emotion or the feeling to be present, number one, and you allow the full expression of that element. And little by little, you will see that if you do that, number one, it will decrease the pain, or it will decrease the emotion. And if you really surrender to it, you will find this fundamental reality, let's say.
Also, the way you phrase it, I remember one of my teachers, Stuart Schwartz, that was one of his main techniques. He would say, anxiety is here, take a breath.
Yeah.
And it's very different from I am angry, I am afraid. It's just stating what's happening now, and there's much less identity around it. Did you find that?
Yeah, I found that. I remember during the JEs, the phrase that I used to say is that there is anger.
There is anger.
There is anxiety.
Okay.
There is fear. Instead of I am fearful, or I am anxious, or I am this.
Right.
At the time as well, of course, there was a lot of feelings of non-agency that they came back later. But at the time, it was a process of pretty much deconstruction, let's say, which I consider to be the first big part of the process of awakening, a process in which you deconstruct the sense of self, you deconstruct filters of perception, you deconstruct the sense of time and space, right? Until everything becomes this, let's say. And in my case, at least, what I see that happen is that there was a moment in which all of the things that I thought they were gone, they came back to be integrated. So there was much more like a sense of self and no self, or existence and non-existence, or this and that, feminine and masculine, or whatever you want to phrase it. But I jumped a lot because there was a long process of deconstruction.
Mm-hmm. Was the Angelo DeLullo retreat instrumental in that, or?
Yeah, it was very much instrumental. I read his book, so I thought it was a great book about awakening. I was pretty much trying to have another shift because, of course, I was caught up in those emotions. And then I went to the retreat online. It was COVID, so there were not in-person retreats. And what ended up happening is that there was a sound meditation in the first day. So there was a lot of meditation, of course, and then at the end of the day, Violet, I don't know, it was a woman playing those crystal bowls.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I think I was there at that retreat. I remember, I mean, online,
Oh, yeah.
not physically. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, it was in July, I think, of 2021,
Mm-hmm.
if I remember correctly. And I thought that it would be annoying, to be honest. I thought, oh, this will be annoying, but of course I'm gonna do it. I came to this retreat to do everything, so I'm gonna do everything. And then she asked us to lay down in bed if possible, to put headphones. And I remember that when she started playing those things, it was like there was only the sound in the universe. There was nothing other than the sound. And I thought, oh, that is interesting. There is only sound. And it was like something static in a way. And I started thinking, why do I call it sound? Why do I label this as sound? It could be anything. But it's just a label that I put and said this is a sound. It could be a sensation. It could be something else.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember that kind of, if you'd say the image was that I started thinking, yeah, it could be anything. It could be a flower. It could be a building. It could be nothing. And then suddenly came a koan into my mind. I had read a book by Henry Shukman. I don't know if you know him. He's a Zen teacher. Great book, by the way. It's called One Blade of Grass. He's a very good writer. He is a writer. So it's about his own process, and he is trained in Zen and trained in Zen with koans, right? Those, what is the sound of one hand clapping and that kind of thing. And I remember in the book, there was one koan. I never tried koans. That it was stop the sound of the distant temple bell. It was just like that. It was not even a question. And I remember that in the book, he said that it was an important koan in the tradition. But I was laying down and that woman was playing the sounds, and that koan came into my mind. It's not that I remembered the book or thought about, oh, this is related to sound. The koan came into my mind, and the only thing that happened is that the sound revealed itself as silence. That's it. So suddenly, instead of sound, there was only silence. And I realized in that moment that everything that I thought it was concrete, that it was solid, that it was something, that it was energy, was actually nothing, that was actually silence. So she stopped playing when I had this realization. I remember she stopped playing. And when I got up from bed, and there was like a silence inside of me, instead of the sense of self that it was in this area, it was very silent and very still. And I look at things and I thought, oh my goodness, this bed is consciousness. Everything that I look is actually consciousness. There is no difference between energy and consciousness. So my paradigm that I had like for 30 years that there was only two things in the universe, which was consciousness and energy, completely fell apart that night. Completely fell apart. And I was shocked that that was the case, because for me, it was obvious that there was consciousness and energy, that one affect the other. There was subject and object.
Mm-hmm.
But then the next day, there was terror inside of me. In that space, quote unquote space, I was terrified. So it was an increased sense of terror that started to come.
Is that terror because you felt like you were kind of disappearing, or what was
yeah, it was a sense of fear of annihilation.
Yeah.
That was the feeling.
Right.
That was the feeling. And I was afraid that it was true, that I didn't exist. Because, of course, at that point, I was already reading stuff from Buddhism and Zen and other traditions. And, of course, there is this idea of no self. And I thought, okay, maybe that's true, right? So there was this intense fear that started to come. And it became really terrifying. But I already had decided in that retreat that I would surrender to whatever. So I remember that I didn't talk to Angelo at all. I continued meditating, and then one day before the end of the retreat, he decided to do an exercise with everybody, which was very simple. It was like, close your eyes, just access a sound of the environment. It could be any sound. It could be the sound of the AC, the sound of the traffic. Choose a sound. And I remember that I chose the sound of the traffic because there is an avenue here. And every time I would pay attention to the sound, would become silence. So then he said, get another sound and compare with the first one. Compare if it's different, compare if there are limits to it. And I would pay attention to the second sound, it would become silence immediately. It would cancel itself out. And then he said, now pay attention to the sensations of the body. When he said that, I knew what would happen. I knew that if I pay attention to the sensations, they would disappear, because that was what's happening. Mm-hmm. So I remember that I paid attention to the sensations, and then suddenly there was nothing. There was no me, there was no body, there was no apartment, there was nothing. Basically nothing anywhere. And I freaked out. I completely freaked out. Then he said, yeah, we have the 2 hours or 1 hour and a half for lunch now. And I was freaking out. I thought that I was dying, like in a literal way, not in a metaphorical way. Mm-hmm. And then I thought, I cannot tell my partner that I'm dying, because what he's going to think, right? So I'm going to lay down in bed and I'm going to die. But the feeling was falling into an abyss, was falling into nothingness. And everything that I thought about the self, about ideas, about beliefs, about principles and values, anything, it would feel like vanishing. Everything was vanishing. And I grieved the sense of self, because I thought at least it was something that I knew. Now I don't know what's going to happen. I'm going to die. But I think it lasted a long time, like over 30 minutes. And then I felt like everything stopped. Everything stopped. It was very silent, very still. I got up from bed. There was like a hole here, like a black hole. Mm-hmm. There was no me anymore. There was no sense of I anymore. And then I thought, I think I'm going to go for a walk. I've been in this apartment for 4 days meditating and doing this, whatever Angelo says that you should do. And it's when everything was glowing. There was love pouring out of the universe. Like the feelings of separation between the body and everything else was fading, was melting. I remember I was moving my arms and everything was moving together with me. It was everything beautiful, like gorgeous. Not even beautiful, it was gorgeous. There was bliss, like a feeling of bliss that I never felt in my life. Everything was perfection. Everything was in the right place. I remember I started crying in the middle of the street because everything was so gorgeous and love, and everything was glowing much more than with the cosmic consciousness. Like everything was glowing, the sky, the floor, the trees, the cars. And that night, it was pure bliss. I couldn't sleep because there was too much bliss. I felt that I was everything, but in a much deeper way, like there was nothing to be done. There was just like enjoyment, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And then it was in that moment, I was still thinking about the Finders and Jeffrey Martin's Matrix. So to me, that was location 5.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember that very soon, then I decided to talk to Annemiek at the time because I wanted to understand what was going on. And then very soon I was already in what they call location 6, 7, 8, 9. It was very fast.
And did that happen just by floating in that and not resisting, or was there a way that led to
From
these
that
higher
moment on,
locations?
it was when I noticed that the process was taking care of itself.
Uh-huh.
Before, there was a lot of effort in terms of doing stuff or meditating or whatever. From that moment on, I just needed to go for walks. That's what I did. And the process would continue.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember that everything started to much more uh, disintegrate. Let's say it was a period of disintegration a lot, the deconstruction. So very fast, there was no sense of time anymore, no sense of the space started to go away as well.
Are you
Until
able to function in your life during this time?
there were moments in which there were glitches, uh, like I would be walking and then I had to stop because everything would be like a blackout.
Uh-huh.
But then I would continue walking. It was like this mini glitches, let's say.
Uh-huh.
But that was fast. It was not like something that would last days or anything. Or I
Mm-hmm.
would go take a shower and I would look at the shampoo and I didn't know what it was. You know, that kind of thing. I didn't know what to do with it. But that was like not something that lasted. It was like little glitches, you know. But what was happening as well, it was I was noticing that time and space they were deconstructing more and more. So everything was becoming really transparent, was becoming very fluid. There was a moment in which I started calling potentiality, that I started noticing that time was very flexible, that was not rigid as I thought it was from past, present, and future. It could be the other way around. Or I remember one day that I tell the story a lot, that I went to take a shower and I looked at the bathroom walls and they could be also anything.
Mm-hmm.
They could be anything. It's just that they, at some point, they were walls, but I could see the potential for being something different.
Mm-hmm.
And that was related to almost everything, even making a sandwich. It could be anything, but it was just a case that it was a sandwich, you know.
Did you discover a sense of what drives reality? I mean, was it your thoughts or your unconscious, or What made the
That was
sandwiches?
much later. That was the psyche.
Uh-huh.
That was much later, like months ago. So in that phase was much more a sense of deconstruction, a sense of I'm losing grip of this concrete reality. Things are starting to become very fluid and transparent until the point that really there was nothing. I went for a walk and then suddenly there was no walk, there was no me walking, there was no time, there was no space. Uh, I I remember that I was concerned because there could be anything. That the feeling was there has never been anything. There will never be anything. Nothing is ever happening.
Mhm.
So
Now
I call that period non-existence.
I know you transition out of this state. I'm wondering what the next version on your journey ended up being.
So that's when I remember that I kind of the feeling that I got to the bottom of something. That is when something flipped and everything that I thought had gone away came back to be integrated. So the way I conceptualized at the time is that there was in the beginning the actual moment, right? People call that now, the feeling of that there is a now. There is even the book, right, called The Power of Now. And my feeling that from actuality, the actual moment started to go to more potential. I could see that it could be time and space were very flexible. And then suddenly it went to really non-existence. It didn't exist time and space or anything. But it was a moment in which it was like the point of view changed. And it was like I was seeing things from the absolute. So I could see that there were layers of reality, like the actual moment and the potentiality, they were there. But I was not engaging with those layers of reality, but I could see them. I could perceive them. And I could perceive that people were engaging in those layers of reality. And then it's when something else came online, which I call the primordial force, which was the discovery of something that is much more fundamental than everything else, which people call Nibbana, Dharmakaya, Spanda, something very fundamental, consciousness itself, let's say, or the source. So it was the feeling of something that gives rise to existence and non-existence, to, form and formlessness. So then it was when the realization, oh my goodness, form and formlessness is the same thing. That is when what I call Heart Sutra realization, because up to that point, there was form and then went to formlessness, right? So I got to the bottom of formlessness. Then I, quote unquote, discovered something even more fundamental than form and formlessness that gives rise to those two polarities, let's say. And then there was the realization, oh, those two things are actually sides of the same coin, and fundamentally they are not even different from each other. And then a new phase opened that I called Omni. It was a phase in all of those dimensions, they were open to me. So I could go to non-existence, I could go to form, I could go bring more joy or bring less joy or bring whatever I wanted. Like I could feel the source of everything all the time.
So it sounds like in this phase, you had a sense of agency again.
It's interesting, of course, because in the beginning it started to have a feeling of an I again, of a body. And I started to be concerned. I thought maybe I'm regressing. And then it was when it became both and. Instead of either self or no self, it started to become self and no self at the same time.
Yeah.
So there
That's so,
was at the same time a sense of agency and no agency, that they were together and fundamentally not even different from each other.
yeah. So is that what your, I noticed your website is called Omni Integration. And, something that I always like to say is the big secret of non-duality is that it includes duality.
Yeah.
Does Omni Integration reflect that at all?
Yeah, I think what started to happening is that I started to realize that everything was a matter of perspective, right? That there is no, because throughout the process it was like, oh, now I know what is the truth, right? The truth is the absolute, or the truth is non-duality, or the truth is no self. In the beginning, the truth was the self, right? The truth was that there is a world that is three-dimensional or four-dimensional, whatever is your paradigm. Uh, and that is the truth. It's just like that I had the truth that there is consciousness and energy, and that is the truth. Then consciousness and energy is the same thing. There is only one thing, right? That is consciousness. So there was a moment, oh, both coexist at the same time, and fundamentally they are not different. That actually progressed to neither nor. There was a moment after that everything started to collapse, really subject and object collapse. And there was a feeling that there was neither self nor no self. And then it's when I realized, oh, everything is a matter of perspective. It's not that this is true and this is not true. It is just that all those perspectives are valid, but they are not necessarily true in and of themselves. I don't know if it's clear.
Yeah, I mean, as clear as those things can be.
Yeah.
I'm curious, how would you describe your experience now, and how long has it been somewhat stable in this particular form?
So to me, so it's complicated because the way I see the process is that there are several dimensions of awakening. I think people tend to think of awakening as this very linear process, right?
Mm-hmm.
That starts here and ends here. But in my case, I started perceiving, for example, that there are people who develop their processes of awakening related to energy. So it's much more related to Kundalini, for example.
Mm-hmm.
They start perceiving energy, they are separate from energy, suddenly their energy is vibrating in their bodies, suddenly everything starts to vibrate, and in the end, there is only energy. That is one kind of awakening. Then
Yeah.
there's another one that could be related to form, which is unity, right? I started realizing, oh, yeah, there is the separation between me and everything else. Then suddenly the separation starts to fade. I started seeing myself in something else, like a tree or the sky or an object. And then suddenly there is only that, there is only life, or there is only one thing. The
Mm-hmm.
same thing with non existence or emptiness. I started perceiving that phenomena is empty in nature, right? Fundamentally empty, or any kind of phenomenon. And then suddenly there is only emptiness. So I think it depends a lot on how many of these dimensions the person had access to in the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Some people have much more access to only awareness, for example, which is neither full nor empty, is something that is much more silent and something that is much more peaceful, that is more like a witness, right? And then they develop their process of awakening related to that dimension specifically.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the end, there is only consciousness, there is only awareness, there is only this. But I would say that for me, after that period in which I had access to all kinds of dimensions, everything kind of integrated in only one thing. And then it became that way for at least 2 years. From the end of 2023 until the end of 2025. So it was like there was nothing happening. There was no need to do anything. There was even a feeling of completion in a way, because everything was integrated. There was no movement necessary to do anything, because there was a feeling of completion. Then something else opened that I think is related to the psyche. It was really the started the realization, oh, everything that happens is related to my psyche. Everything is a construction of my psyche. That lasted 6 months, more or less, and reintegrated with everything else. So now I'm back to...
Would you say you're back to, first of all, having feelings and maybe some sense of agency? How would you say your experience is different than the guy on the street now, being that some of this is now back?
So it's complicated, because the way I see things is that it's much more related to the idea, I think, of the Zen circle. In the end, you become human again.
Yeah.
But a human that is different from the beginning, that is not exactly the same. But what I think that it changed in terms of the way I understand the process is that there is not dissociation from what's going on. Whatever is happening, if it's grief, if it's happiness, if it's whatever, I feel it completely. Would
you say that you're also much more in the now and without resistance?
So all of these ideas, now or past or future, of self or no self, or existence and non-existence, to me, they are just perspectives that I can engage intellectually with them, but they don't feel as true necessarily. Yeah. But for me, if you ask me, my life now is much more like a normal human. Mm-hmm. A normal human in which I wake up, I have my coffee, I work, but yes, I have feelings, I have emotions. I think what there is less possibility of dissociating from what is. I think during the process of awakening, there was a big period of dissociation, a positive dissociation, not necessarily pathological or negative, but there was a moment in which people call this equanimity, right? Something is happening, is not affecting you because you are the absolute, or you are something that is not that. But to me, at least in my view, after things integrate, and that's why I call omni-integration, that is the integration of all aspects of you together with reality, so it becomes one thing, really. It's, to me, the movement of detachment or wanting to get out of that doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah, so
it's uncomfortable.
So if you're feeling anger, you're feeling it, but you're not resisting it. And the lack of resistance is a different experience than most people would have.
Yeah, well, of course, I don't know if it's a different experience, because
you don't know their experience.
I don't know their experience, right? But I would say that it's different than it was before. In a sense that before there were ways by which I would try to dissociate from that.
Yeah.
Now it's much more, okay, it's here, let's express that fully, because to me that the full expression of whatever is here is what leads to go through it faster, in a way.
Yeah, right.
But I think this is not a good selling point for awakening. I think awakening also really brings a lot of the stuff that you put in the closet or put in the basement, that I, for example, suppressed for decades, right?
Yeah.
Everything to the surface.
Yeah.
I, at least in my case, there was a lot of trauma. There was a lot of things that were suppressed during decades of life, and everything is coming to the surface. And I, for example, right now I'm doing therapy again.
Uh-huh.
I don't think I think it's a valuable tool, because I think that there are aspects of the self that need to be seen. I
Yeah.
don't think necessarily that the self is not important, to me, as just as valid as anything else.
Hmm. Well, what happens, Brian and I often use this two-wing analogy of a plane, that there's the self, and a lot of people are just focused on that, or there's the formless or non-self. A lot of people are focused on that. The real key to soaring is that you have a balance of the two, and that you're not denying either.
Yeah, so even on my website, I put that you're not fixating in any of them, but you're not dismissing any of them as well.
Right. Right.
Right? So whatever happens in your life, you are, I think, flexible enough to go see what's going on.
Hmm. Yeah.
So that is at least my process. So I don't deny anything, but at the same time, I try not to. I mean, try not to. Sometimes there is fixation on something, and if there is fixation on something, I'm gonna take a look why there is fixation on something.
Right.
I don't think I'm immune to fixation or I'm immune to something. I'm human. And I think that is the biggest realization, that there is a nervous system, that it has its own triggers, it has its own conditioning. And especially in the end, for me, in the end, quote unquote, because I'm not saying that there is an end. But in this moment that I'm in now, there is the realization, yeah, there is a lot of conditioning. There is a lot of things that are related to my own psyche that are affecting my relationship with other people as well.
Hmm.
So these needs to be seen. I think in terms of qualification, I think it never ends.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think that
Well,
you have, I think that when you said that it was not a good advertisement for awakening, I think that you really described the antidote to that. I mean, if things start to arise, if from conditioning or trauma or things start to arise, when you say there is fear, there is anger, and you're not employing the old strategies that you used to employ to not have those emotions.
Right,
And
right.
that seems to me the thing that keeps it flowing and gives us hope that we can get through it, or it can go through us and out.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. I just don't want to give the idea because, I mean, at least for me, maybe someone else has a different kind of perspective. But for me, I thought in the beginning that awakening would be this solve all problems, that I would be completely equanimous all the time. I think I never believed in the idea that I would be blissful and happy all the time, but I would be equanimous all the time. Whatever was going on, it wouldn't be affecting me. And there was a large period of time during awakening in which that was the case. But when things started really to integrate, uh, all emotions started to come back. All emotions started to come back, and all the things are starting to arise again. And trauma had to be dealt with. So I think the process really brings everything to be seen, to be included, to be integrated. That's why I call dominant integration,
Mhm.
because you're gonna, at least in my case, you're gonna see everything.
Right. You can't get away with anything. You can't avoid anything.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, right.
I
That
mean,
is quite a journey. I'm curious if people want to know more about you and the work that you do. I think you do some coaching now. Is that true?
yeah, I've been doing some coaching, trying to help people also
Uh-huh.
process all of those things, trying to integrate better all of those things. I think one of the things that I noticed, if you integrate all of these parts that you think that are separate, right, or things that I put in a closet or on the basement that I didn't want to see, all my fundamental fears, for example,
Hmm.
they there was a time that they came back, like the core fears, the fear of abandonment or whatever fear you have, they come back for you to see, for you to take a look, for you to invite them to the table,
Yeah, yeah,
and those things are difficult. Yeah, they are not easy. At the same time, I also, at least in the method that I use, I consider that people follow different developments through awakening. It's not
hmm,
necessarily only through emptiness or only through awareness. Some people have different ways in by which the process develops.
yeah. If people want to find out more about you, what's the best way?
Well, there is the website omniintegration.net, omni-integration.net,
Uh-huh.
and they can take a look, they can see what I offer.
Yeah, yeah. It's a fascinating journey, Luciano, and so many different stages. And it seems like that's continuing. And I like to think that, like, that's happening to all of us. Just in your case, it was some of those stages were quite dramatic.
Yeah, so I talk to a lot of people, and of course, I think one of the things that I think it's important to say is that some people have very dramatic kind of shifts. That it's my case. In
Hmm.
my case, was always an event that marked a before and an after.
Yeah,
But in many cases, I see people that it's a process that is incremental.
yeah,
It's not about huge shifts and then one day is this way and the other day is the other. So I think it's good not to be fixated in the idea that it's always dramatic.
right.
Some people, they have a lot of emergencies and crises. Some people, they don't. It depends on each one. I've always been the case in which I have periods of stability and then something opens up and then there is a crisis and then there is another period of instability. To me, it was kind of that way.
Yeah. Any final words, Brian?
Well, this has been so interesting to hear, and I think so helpful to see that there are so many ways to experience it. But I
Right,
also think it's helpful, as you've said, that everyone is different,
right.
and what is here, what start with what's happening to you now, as opposed to hoping that something that happened to Luciano might happen to you, or whatever, or something is going to happen in the future, as opposed to what's here now.
Yeah, exactly. I think that is important because to me, at least, whatever was happening now was a gateway to go deeper, to even go to another phase or another part of the process. It was always that way. It was not by denying what it's here.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
beautiful.
Well, thank you so much. It was really fascinating.
Thank you.
If people want to support us, you can go to patreon.com/awareness explorers, where we send you a lot of extra stuff. But we're all on some kind of crazy journey, and the entrance to that journey seems to be what's going on exactly in your life right now.
Exactly.
Good way of putting it.
Great.
Thank you. This has
And
been so fascinating. I really appreciate your time and the generous sharing of your experience for our
Of course.
listeners.
Of course, it was a pleasure for sure.
yeah.
Good.
So, friends, as always, keep exploring.
Keep exploring. Thank you for listening to Awareness Explorers. To learn more, you can check out our website at awarenessexplorers.com. please subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast app. We'd love it if you would post a review. And please share our link with family and friends, because knowing yourself as awareness is the greatest gift you can give yourself or someone you love.